Yes. Joseph and Ben, the stage is yours.
Hi. I guess we didn't even talk about this, but I guess I'll start and leave the best to last. The idea behind this talk, well, Ben and I have known each other now almost 20 years, right? And Ben is probably one of the most important people who got me back into psychology after me leaving it. And I wanted to talk a bit about one thing that we talked about a long time ago, which is the question that I came to him with is, if you are doing something like Scrum, you're in a position of a coach or a Scrum Master, how do you actually get people to change? How do you actually get people to do things? Because one of the basic ideas behind being a Scrum Master is that you have no authority. You can't tell people to do things. And actually, this is a good idea in the context of Scrum, because if you have this authority to tell people to do things, that means that people can abdicate taking responsibility. They can say, look, it's not my fault, he told me to do this. So the challenge is, how do you get people to take responsibility for their actions? And one of the things that I discovered, and Ben pointed me back to the original literature on this, is that even if you don't have authority, you have power. So what we would like to do, I'd like to talk a little bit about, this is some basic social psychology, about the thoughts on power. And then I want to hand it over to Ben, who will go a little bit more behind the curtains and, let's say, turn the knobs up to 11 and tell you some very interesting things. Quite honestly, I just did organize this talk so I could sit back and listen to Ben talk. Okay, I know how far I can get as a psychologist, and I know that one thing I like to do is just shut up and listen to people who are better than me talk. Okay, so as I said, not having authority doesn't mean that you don't have power. And the concept of power is something very interesting in social psychology. And one of the basic works on power was written 1959. That's almost as old as Ben and I am, by John French and Bertrand Raven. It's called The Basis of Social Power. And French and Raven said some very interesting, some very powerful, some very important things. One, they said that you give a person power over you. A person only has power over you if you give them that power. Now, when you think about this, at first you say, well, that might not be right. But there are certain circumstances where, actually most of the circumstances, where you knowingly or unknowingly give someone power over you. Okay. And I think this is important to be aware of, this fact that if you have power over someone, it's because someone is giving you that power. Now, French and Raven essentially said that there are 5 basic types of power. The first type of power is a positive power. It's something they call reward power. You give someone power over you if you believe that they can do something good for you. It doesn't even have to be the fact that they can do something. You just have to believe that they can do something good for you. Okay? You know, do this for me and I'll buy you a beer or a coffee or something like that. If you actually say that to someone and they do something for you, you have now exerted power over them just based on their belief in that. Now, if they do this and you're a good chap and you buy them a beer or a coffee, what you've done is you've reinforced this power. You've proven that you stand to your word. And the more often you do that, the more often this power base is reinforced to the point where you can ask them to do something and then not give them the reward, and they'll still do it. They might think, oh, maybe he forgot this time. So reward power is the first type of power. The second is coercive power. Coercive power. Do this or I'll beat you up. I'll hit you. I'll hurt you. So whereas reward power promises a positive reaction, coercive power promises a negative reaction. Coercive power, quite interestingly, that's the type of power that we think that we have no control over. Right? Think about all of those of you who have a car. And if you're like me, you might drive a little bit too fast on the road. But think about what happens if you're driving along the road and you see a police car on the side of the road. What do you normally do? Well, for most of us, we'll slow down, which means just the suggestion of having this coercive power in itself is powerful. It's scary. And this type of coercive power is something that governments often use to manipulate people. Just the threat of coercion can be enough to influence people's behavior. The third type of power is something that we call legitimate power. You give someone legitimate power over you if you believe that they have the right to that power. They don't actually have to have the right. You just have to believe it. Once again, interesting thing is that legitimate power often comes as a result of an implicit or an explicit social contract. The implicit contract, that's the contract, between, for example, between parents and children. And all of those of you who have children know that you need to renegotiate this contract on a weekly basis, at least, right? The explicit social contract is quite often something like your work contract, right? Now, legitimate power holds both aspects in it. It holds a reward component and it holds a coercive or punishment component, all right? So if, a parent with a child, I learned this as a child. If I brought home good grades from school, I would get a reward. But first time my parents caught me smoking marijuana and drinking vodka at 14 or so, and come on, Ben, you had the same thing. That's the coercive component. You weren't allowed to go out for 2 weeks. The same thing happens when you're at work. If you do a good job, you'll get a bonus, you'll get promoted. But what happens if you screw up? You'll be punished, you might be fired. Yeah. So these three types of power, reward power, coercive power, legitimate power, are all what we call positional power bases. Positional power base, that means that you are in a position to reward something. You are in a position to punish someone. You are in a position to assert this type of legitimate power. Okay. If we're looking for the types of power that we want to be able to use to help to guide others, there are two more power bases. These power bases, the first one we call expert power. You give someone expert power over you if you believe they know what they're doing and they know what they're talking about, right? Doctors say that it's bad to smoke. You hear that? Doctors know what they're talking about. You might believe them. Okay? An interesting aspect of expert power is that it extends to the boundaries of a person's expertise, but the suggestion that expert power might extend beyond the boundaries of someone's expertise is quite often used in advertising. If you think about it, Roger Federer or David Beckham, back when he was working, stuff like that, are quite well known and quite famous for their sports. But are they really good at shaving? This is the same thing. Taking this power base and moving the suggestion of power outside of it is an advertising technique. Actually, if we go back, reward power taken outside of the context is also an advertising technique. Any of you who live in Europe who have ever seen a commercial for Axe deodorant and perfume for young men, right? You use this perfume and women will come and they will just jump on you. This suggestion of this reward, this manipulation, this is an abuse or a manipulation of this power base. Okay. The fifth type of power is something that's called referent power. Referent power is the most difficult actually to define. Referent power is a power of, it's a personal power, a power of charisma. It's, as Ben once told me, it's a power that's often brought through personal struggle and through surviving this personal struggle. If you see the power that Gandhi had, Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King, this is referent power. This is power that they've proven by personal integrity. Okay. So expert power and referent power are not positional power bases. They're personal power bases. And if you want to improve your personal power and improve your ways of influencing and helping others, you should put your focus on these two power bases. Before I go back to explaining more about that, I just want to add on that later in his life and his research, Bertrand Raven described two further power bases. These power bases are based on your access to information and on your access to people. You think about the power of access to information. Think about Edward Snowden, how much power that one man had. If you think about your access to people, think about the boss's secretary and the power that someone with this gatekeeper role has. So if you want to get better at your power bases, it's best to focus on expert power and referent power. Now, how do you go about doing that? Expert power, what are you doing right now? Continued professional development. You are becoming better. At least we hope when we finish this talk and talking with you afterwards, that you leave here a little bit smarter than when you came. It's your continued professional development. On the side of referent power, it's your continued personal development. Now, how do you work on improving, continuing personal development? Well, as our old friend Dave Harvey once said, 2 or 3 years of psychotherapy would be good for everybody. But lacking that, what do you focus on when you want to improve on a personal level? To do that, there are 5 core competencies that you can look at improving. First, is your rational competence. Rational doesn't mean how smart you are. It's very difficult to improve your IQ, but it is easier to constantly learn how to improve your thinking skills. Second core competence, your emotional skills, your emotional intelligence. How much do you have control of your emotions, and how much do your emotions have control of you? How many of you have gotten an email that got you very angry and you wrote an answer to it, and then you deleted that answer? Or you said, okay, I'll wait overnight, and then I'll delete it tomorrow. I'm honest, I have 2 of them in my outbox right now that I'm probably going to delete before I turn off my computer this evening. It's understanding that, understanding having control of your emotions and seeing how your emotions influence you. Third, your social competencies. How well do you engage with others? It's not a matter of being introverted or extroverted. It's a matter of having these social skills. How to interact with others in a positive way. Fourth, your physical competencies. How healthy are you? Come on, we've just gone through a year of lockdown. How many of you have lost weight? Be honest. Come on, right? Think, how many of you are going actually working out every day? How many of you are going out taking a walk? You I think this is one of the reasons why Ben got his dog. Get you out, get you exercising. So be careful, take care of your health. The fifth core competency. The fifth core competency is spiritual. Spiritual does not mean religious. Spiritual means that people believe in you if they see that you believe strongly in something. Is there something that you believe strongly in? Something that you focused your life on? Preferably something positive that you focus your life on that would also help others get better at that. By looking at these 5 core competencies, looking at where you are along the core competencies levels, you can take a look at thinking about what can I do to improve, to become a better person myself, and to become better at helping others to become better themselves. Another thing you need to be aware of, though, and this is where I want to hand over to Ben, is that anytime you're interacting with others, there is a gradient, there is a power differential, there is a struggle there, which is based on something that's much more subtle than just power. It's something that we're often unaware of consciously, but that affects us all the time. And that's something that's called rank. And now I would like to stop right now and just shut up and sit back and listen to Ben talk about rank. I learned about it from him many years ago, and it was one of the most interesting and also one of the most shocking experiences that I had, realizing how this permeates all our interactions with each other. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Joseph. So I was reflecting on what you were saying and how it fits with ideas of rank. So certainly in positional power, that is a type of rank, isn't it? We have hierarchical organizations, and always have, and even organizations that try to flatten themselves and get rid of some of the formal hierarchies. It gets even more complex, doesn't it? Because there's the informal hierarchies of who has the power to make things happen and who has the power to block things isn't quite as clear cut as formal rankings like in the military, for example, where even there it's not as clear cut as the official ranks might indicate. So I work a lot in in settings that are very hierarchical. I work a lot with the UK healthcare system, the National Health Service. It's one of the 3 largest employers in the world, next to the Indian National Railway and the Chinese Army. It has 1.2 million employees. And that doesn't count all the people who are contractors and suppliers and so forth. So it touches the lives of a lot of people. As a system, it is very hierarchical, and yet it's dedicated to care, to health. Yeah. So there's some interesting paradoxes in that work, and you might find some parallels with the technology world and some differences as well. But I think the positional power stuff is really quite important, and it's we shouldn't underestimate how much that shapes our reactions to one another, because we all grew up with that. We all grew up with parents where there's legitimate power of parents, but there's, as you all remember from your teen years, a lot of that is about renegotiating power issues with your parents. We've all gone to school where there's formal authority and rebellion against authority and so forth. And we all have our very personal relationship with authority. Some of us might find it comforting that we know where we stand. A lot of people find it very uncomfortable. We find that in large hierarchical organizations, a lot of people don't do well in that environment and leave. And one of the reasons I think people leave is because of their sense of agency, their sense of power, and the autonomy you have to cede when you become part of an organization, as opposed to, say, being self-employed. And we find certain professions, you find more people with what you might call power issues. And I think it's a really fascinating topic to explore. It's often implicit, it's under the surface, and we don't talk about it very much. And sometimes it helps to reflect, well, what does it really mean to me, and how has that changed? Because my experience of power, of course, is different for me now, as a man who's as old as French and Raven's paper, it's very different for me now than it was when I was a youth, right? But I still might react in the same ways without realizing that my power, my authority, my position in life has changed. How other people see me has changed, because power isn't just in my official title, it's in relationship, it's in how I see myself, but just as importantly, has how other people see me. And as Joseph said, power is given, right? We give other people power. So there's a question to consider, which is, who has power over me in my life? And what would I want or need to say to them? And reflecting on this question, I realized for myself anyway, and it took me many years to get here, but I realized that the only people that really have power over me in my life are the people that I love.
Wow.
Yeah, so, my boss, my clients, whatever, yeah, I care what they think, but in the end of the day, I'm not, but my daughter, now she has power. Yeah. So think about who you choose to give your power to and why. Yeah. And I think there's something really fundamental about this in terms of, if we come back to the theme of this talk, which is about how do we influence without formal authority? Well, the people who care about you, you will influence, right? And the way that you get people to care about you is by caring about them, right? So that's part of that, those competencies that Joseph spoke about, and I think particularly the emotional and social intelligence is, how do we connect with people? How do we build trust. And that's expert power and referent power are powers that build trust in others. Formal authority doesn't build trust, not really. Not unless they really trust our expertise, or they trust that we care about them, or we trust what Joseph called our spiritual value, our spiritual competence, or what I might call our values-based competence, our motives, right? We trust people or mistrust people's motives. If we think their heart's in the right place and they care about what we care about and their values are aligned with our values, then we'll follow them. We'll do what they ask us to do because we fundamentally trust where they're going. But we also need to trust they know what they're doing, right? So that's the expert power. You know, I go to my doctor for medical advice. I don't go to my bartender for medical advice. Yeah, it's situational, but we do go for, you know, we do look to experts for information. We do look to experts, but for people in terms of trust, I think it goes beyond that. It's the referent power, and that's the emotional and social intelligence. How do you build social capital? How do you build trust with people? And I think it is through empathy. I think it is through understanding other people, and that ability to understand people, that grows your personal rank, because people feel understood. They feel safe with you. So, you know, if you want to influence people, well, how much do you know about them? What do you know about their lives? What do you know about what matters to them? Because often we think what matters to us is what matters to others, you know. So we think, well, if I'm motivated by recognition and reward that they will be, they might not be. They might be motivated by other things. Everybody's got things going on in their lives that we don't know about, right? But we can be curious, we can be interested, especially people who are different. And in today's world, working virtually and working across in multicultural environments, working in multinational organizations, there's a lot of diversity. So how much do we really know about the people that we work with? And how can we be curious enough for them to know that we're interested in them, that we care? I spoke to a manager last week. I was saying one of her staff members was having a breakdown. And turned out that this man was from Myanmar. And it came out in the conversation with his manager that his family was still there. Although he's here in the UK and works in the health service, his family was there, and some really horrible stuff has been happening. And it's impacted his family there. And he said that not a single person among his colleagues had asked him about what was happening in Myanmar, and, you know, did he have family there? Is he all right? How is this impacting him? Yeah. So suddenly something that's on the world news that feels very far away is right there, right? It's in your team, and people didn't even know it, right? Maybe they didn't know he was from Myanmar, or maybe they sort of knew as a label, but they didn't really clock that when they heard what they hear on the news, if you follow the news, what that meant to this person. Or if you have an Indian colleague, what's the impact on that colleague of COVID in India right now? You know, do they have family there? Have they been impacted? And these are things that are hard for people to talk about if you don't inquire and ask. You know, what's it like to be you now in this world? Yeah, and to really be genuinely interested in that. And I think there's something about the ability to do that and do that well is really key to building trust, to building relationships, to building a kind of intimacy. And when we do that, you know, it's not surprising that people will be more open to what we want, what we need, what we're asking of them as part of work, because they feel they're cared for. So they give us power, right? It's always given, but it has to be earned, right? And I think that's the thing that leaders understand. It has to be earned by your ability to share a vision and inspire people, but also by your ability to connect and make people feel like they matter, that their work matters, that it makes a difference to you and the people around you, and that they matter to you, right? And the thing is, you don't have to go and do a degree in psychology to do this. It's basic human stuff, right? You know, it's probably something that every one of you experienced your parents doing with you when you were young. I hope they did. You know, so we've got it within us, right? We know somewhere in us, we know how to do it, but I think we lose that because we fear somewhere that we might lose authority, and in fact we gain it. By being open, by being accessible, we actually gain authority, we gain influence, and we create safety for others. Now, I don't know how you talk about psychological safety in the technology world, but in the health world, we talk about it because it's safety critical environment. We talk about the connection between psychological safety and patient safety. In the aviation industry, they talk about this, the connection between the crew psychological safety and safety of the aircraft, right? Because bad things happen when people don't feel safe, they don't speak up, they don't raise concerns, and that's when accidents happen. So you make fewer mistakes when people feel safe. And you gain the diversity of views, you gain that people feel free to be themselves and bring their whole selves in. You gain that diversity. And some of the research on innovation shows that if you combine psychological safety with diversity, you get really good problem solving in teams, right? Otherwise, you end up with groupthink if everybody feels like they should be saying the same sorts of things. So I think these are really important things. So we've talked about positional power, we've talked about personal power, but there's another element to this which has to do with social power that's unearned. It has to do with our identities. And well, by that, I mean our gender, our race, ethnicity, age, nationality, religion, sexuality, and so on. And within each of these social identities, there's a kind of implicit hierarchy, which we may consciously disagree with, and yet we've all been socialized into. Yeah, and I think this is particularly important to understand when we're working with diversity and working in diverse teams. How many times have you been in a team where the men dominate the conversation? Never mind that right now we're two older white men dominating this presentation here. Yeah, and women either don't get as much airtime, or when they do say something, it's not heard, and then a man says the same, more or less the same thing that the woman had said, but in different words, and everyone hears it. Go, oh, great idea, Joseph. You know, and the women are probably nodding, recognizing this, and the men are going, really? But this is part of the gender socialization, at least in our generation we grew up with. And unfortunately, it still goes on. The evidence shows that there's still a gender pay gap. There's, in the UK, there's a race pay gap. There's a life expectancy gap by race. Yeah. So, I mean, these are very real issues in diverse and multicultural societies and in diverse and multicultural teams. And I think there's also, what happens is that we don't like to talk about this stuff because it raises all those ugly isms that we would rather not identify with. But we live in a society that's structurally shaped by rank. Now, Robert Fuller he coined the term rankism. He said that racism, sexism, homophobia, anti-Semitism, these are all kind of manifestations of rankism. And it's a bit like cancer. We used to think at once upon a time that different cancers were different diseases, like the skin cancer and cancer of the liver and leukemia. These were all different diseases, but actually he says is there's, now we understand they're all part of the same malignancy we call cancer. They're just different manifestations of it. And he says that's what rankism is that we have, is that the same dynamics of sorting people in their value by characteristics, by group identities as having more or less importance or more or less value, whether we're doing it by race, gender, sexuality, nationality, or anything else, is a form of rankism, and rankism is the disease. Yeah. So it's the abuse of power. And I think it's really, if you're going to get into the nitty gritty of trying to understand and talk about power, we can't do that without talking about abuse of power, because a lot of our issues about power in our society stem from the abuse of power, the betrayal of trust, and the abuse of power, and the abuse of legitimate power, particularly so positional power. And our history books are full of that. And, just because we don't like to look at it and wish it away doesn't necessarily make it so. So we need to be able to engage in understanding the impact of that on other people. And we all have blind spots, particularly if we're part of a group that's the dominant or mainstream group, right? So I live in a country where the language of this country is my language. I've spoken English all my life. Some would say, I spoke American for the first half of it, but never mind, it's close enough. And I don't know what it's like to move to another country and be working in a second language, but I can only imagine it's a challenge, right? So I have an advantage because of my language. And most of the time, I don't even notice it. I take it for granted, right? Just as I take being able-bodied for granted. I can walk and go places. I can go up and down flights of stairs. I don't need to find the disabled access. I don't need to find the lift to, and then one year, what happened not that long ago was I developed a condition and I couldn't walk without pain. And I spent about a year limping and walking with a cane, and it got progressively worse. I ended up needing surgery, which fixed it, thankfully. But it gave me a real insight into what it was like to live in this world with that disability. And I hadn't even noticed before. And I think that's the thing about when we have an advantage in a particular area where we have power, if you like, or privilege, we don't notice what advantages we have, right? Because it's the absence of the problem rather than, some kind of experience of special privilege. But it impacts our relationships, and it impacts our ability to build trust and to influence people, particularly people who have different backgrounds. We need to understand who people are if we want to influence them. So, if I say to a group here, oh, I don't see gender, you're all just human beings to me, the women are probably thinking, yeah, right. Yeah, because if I don't see your gender, that's a whole big part of who you are. If I can't see race, I can't see color, I can't see nationality, I can't see gender, I'm missing a whole piece of who you are. And that means I'm not connecting with you. So I need to be able to see it, and I need to be able to recognize that it's different from my own. And I need to be able to engage with that and engage with how your identity and the things you've identified with in your life, whether it's your nationality or religion or gender, sexuality, or race, all those things, how they have shaped your experience of life because it's different than mine. And just to be curious about that, I think it really helps in engaging with people and building that relationship, building that trust that we talked about, and to recognize that we're not all starting on a level playing field with that. There are structural advantages and disadvantages built in that shape people's experience, and to be mindful of that, to be interested in how that's shaped their experience, and to recognize what we can do, particularly in leadership roles, to affect change. I mean, I've been, my whole life, I've been the beneficiary of the world's longest running and least acknowledged affirmative action program for straight white men. And this affirmative action program is so effective that I went through most of my life without even realizing I was in the program. And I never once thought, I wonder if I got that job because of my race or my gender or my height or any of those things, right? And no one's ever suggested that to me, right? That's the nature of advantage blindness. So when we talk about rank, when we talk about power, we also need to talk about how power isn't just personal. It's societal, it's structural, it's built in. We're born into certain groups, not into others. And that affects our life experience. And we need to be able to talk about those differences if we want to really understand how power is operating, not just explicitly, like, who's at which level of pay grade, but also implicitly, whose voices get heard. Yeah. So if I speak up, people listen to me. If someone else speaks up, saying more or less the same thing, they might be seen as aggressive. Yeah. That's the subtle differences. Those are the differences we need to be able to recognize and call out if we want to create psychological safety for everybody. It's easy for someone like me to feel psychologically safe in a lot of situations, but the research on this, at least in the healthcare setting, is that people who are not part of the dominant groups are less likely to feel psychologically safe than the people in the dominant groups. So it needs extra attention. So just to recap, there's personal rank, there's social or societal rank, most of which is inherited and we can't do very much about other than notice and address the injustices that creates. And there's positional. Did I say personal and positional, which Joseph already spoke to. The positional is the one you can do the most about, and you can use the positional to mitigate some of those social, societal rank issues that are prevalent. And I think none of us who've lived through the last year have been blind to the impact, the unequal impact of COVID, depending on people's socioeconomic conditions and where they live and their backgrounds, or on the impact of things like Black Lives Matter. The technology brings injustice onto our computer screens, onto our television screens very quickly these days. So I think I'll pause there and bring Joseph back in. I've been talking for a while. Maybe you have comments, questions you'd like to put to us. We could do the rest conversationally.
Yep. How often have you been in a situation where somebody makes a suggestion and somebody says, no, forget it, it's a crazy idea? You all recognize that, don't you?
Yeah.
What's happening here is getting back to what Ben said. You need to have psychological safety in order to have a level of diversity that will give you creative and innovative solutions. As soon as anyone in your team or in your group is afraid of saying something, making a suggestion, because they might be laughed at, you've lost. Jim Dator, the futurist, has said that any novel idea must first be considered crazy. How often do you let these crazy ideas happen? And how often are they suppressed? Just think about it for a moment in the context of the team or the group that you're working in. How free are people? Even more, who are the people who feel free? It's the people who feel free. Those are ones who have the rank. And the interesting thing about rank is you only notice it if you don't have it. One thing, Ben, there's something that I remember from our earlier talks about, examples of signals of low and high rank.
Mm.
which is also something which might help you realize when someone is signaling, especially a low rank. Can you give some examples on that?
Right. So high rank, yeah. So I guess a couple of signals. One is what you might call disinhibition. So people who feel free to take up a lot of space and time, they expect to be heard, they follow their own train of thought. And there often can be very creative people. You know, I mean, Steve Jobs was famously disinhibited. So there's lots of stories, and in fact, we make kind of heroes of these people a little bit. But when we see it in meetings, when we see it in groups, it is often a signal that people feel free inside. They feel free to take up that space, and that's a good thing, unless you're unaware of how your rank signals are impacting the group dynamic and whether it's a space where everyone feels disinhibited, in which case that's great. But if a few people do and others don't, then that's a bit of a signal there's something interesting going on with rank. And with that comes confidence. You feel unthreatened. You feel like you've got lots of choices. So feeling disinhibited and feeling confident is something to be desired, and certainly not something to discourage. But notice who's got it and who doesn't. The other thing that can happen is when we feel powerful and free and so forth, we might not notice or understand how other people are feeling. You know, I'm having a good day, everything's great. You know, I might not notice colleagues are struggling a little bit, or I might not notice there's other people in the meeting who haven't spoken, right? So it's a kind of decreased empathy, right? We become, the more rank filled we become, the downside is we might not notice or understand how others are feeling or why. Yeah, because we feel okay, so why don't they? Yeah.
How about, hi, I'm Barack Obama, and you know, I had a really shitty weekend. Michelle was really getting on my nerves, and we drank too much at dinner last night. What's that signaling? Right? Right?
Well, what is it signaling, Joseph?
Yeah, right. This is one thing that, you know, these low rank signals, sharing unnecessary personal detail.
Right.
There's the great term in German, Fremdschämen. How often have you been in a meeting where somebody starts saying like too much personal detail and you say, oh God, not again.
Oversharing.
Yeah.
So actually, though, it was interesting you introduced as Barack Obama, because of course that's a bit of a double signal then, because you've got the very high status person doing the lower rank behavior.
Mm-hmm.
But I think some of the ways you might notice people not experience psychological safety or experiencing lower rank is that they might, you know, I mean, actually, when I talk to groups about this, people often say, I feel unsafe. That's a low rank experience in a group or a work context. So you might, if you're having a low rank experience, you might be quick to feel vulnerable. You might suffer from self-doubt or imposter syndrome. You might find that you get upset or easily get upset or angry or feel misunderstood more of the time. And when you're dealing with others, you might find yourself, for example, being more deferential than you would otherwise be. Perhaps you're more compliant than you'd like to be at times, or you avoid speaking up and openly disagreeing. So conflict avoidance, and sometimes you'll see that in meetings. Someone says, right, so do we all agree this? And a couple of people nod and a few people look at their shoes and they say, right, that's agreed then. And we, you know, say, no, wait a minute, hang on. You know, there's a lot of low rank signals there. So there may be some deference, or there may be defiance. So one of the ways that expresses itself is in people getting disengaged, sort of actively disengaged or cynical about their work, their job, their employer, their boss, their team. That's another kind of low rank signal. And the way people typically, when they're in a low rank position, one of the ways that you might find yourself trying to claw back a bit of power, a bit of rank, is through talking to other people, so through collective action. So in one face of that in a formal way would be like trade union movement, but another way is just through office gossip and having a joke at the boss's expense, that kind of thing. There's a way in which you get your dignity, your power back however you can, and you find ways to do that and to collude with other people in that.
Excuse me, Sergey, you raised your hand. Do you have a question?
Yes, thanks. I have a question. Thank you for the structure and explanation of the power topic. I'm working as a Scrum Master and Agile Coach, and in the beginning you asked the question how we influence without formal authority. I see very well expert power and referent power, but sometimes I try to influence by increasing of dissatisfaction of the team by generating more transparency. Is it kind of power, and which kind I cannot map it on your
Okay. When you say more transparency, what do you mean by that?
Concrete example from my current mission, team is not, organization is not satisfied by the productivity level, and I helped them, but in general they are not happy during several years already, and I added some figures, numbers. I helped them to identify where is the problem, and to raise this problem on the higher level to clarify them that yes, we have to change something. I provoked the dissatisfaction and change.
Okay. Yeah. So you in some ways you use your information to help them see what the consequences of not achieving their goals might be.
Yes, probably it is. It was open information, but I helped them in the huge amount of information to find.
So I think that's great. What you're doing is sometimes it's helpful to create cognitive dissonance for people. Yeah. And this is why we need to listen to other people, often because when they tell us things that we don't immediately recognize, it creates cognitive dissonance. And so you can get one of two reactions in my experience with that. You can get, it can increase motivation to change.
Yes,
it can also spark defensiveness.
Yeah,
exactly.
There's a very thin line there. So from the way I approach this goes back to the basics of social psychology, Levin's equation. The behavior is a function of the person and their environment. And it works as well for an individual as for a team. And this is the whole idea also in complexity theory, is that systems evolve as a result of the actions and interactions of the people with each other and their environment. Now, there are two things you can do. You can actually work on trying to influence and change the people, right, which is what we're talking about, or you can influence and change the environment. This is what coevolution is. If you change the environment, that people can't maintain their ingrained behavior patterns, they will be forced to react. Now, the challenge is how to turn up the heat just enough. Otherwise, as Ben said, things will explode or people will resign or things like that. Now, finding that, I actually did a talk and do a whole training on this. I have to take a look what I have online, but essentially this is what a lot of my work goes into, is saying, what are the things that you can change in the environment? What are the knobs that you can turn to turn up the heat just enough that things start cooking, but that they don't burn and explode?
I'm trying to find examples of changing environment, because we influence people, but environment, what is an example? Could you please?
Your developers change your programming language, force them to work on another operating system.
Okay.
What you can imagine changing somebody's IDE programming language, how things would explode, right? Any developer knows that. But then start changing, change the team room. That'll also, and this is thing. Okay, there are a number of models of this. If you're interested, get in touch with me. I'll send you some stuff on this. There's, I normally work with Snowden's Abide model. So you can change the attractors in your system. You can change the boundaries and barriers. You can change the identities, which are people's roles and responsibilities, change the level of diversity, or change the physical environment. There's a whole bunch of stuff. There are actually books written on this. You just have to approach these books with a different set of glasses on it. There's a whole bunch of stuff you can do.
Okay, yes, we cannot change the people, but we can change, it's very complicated to change people, but easier to change environment.
Exactly.
The conditions, yeah.
Thanks. If you can share some links, references, it will be great.
Bring me on LinkedIn and I'll see what I can do.
Okay, great. Thanks. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Sorry, Christina raised her hand. So,
go on.
Hiya.
Hi.
Sorry about that. I just had a quick question. So I found it really interesting in terms of everything that you're talking about in terms of rank, what's low rank and what's high rank. And I think for me, the really big question that I have is, how do we get to the point, I say like within an organization, that we get people to focus on helping the teams to develop their own personal power? I say that because I've had the experience where, and the most recent one, where I'm working with a team and they're distributed teams, and you have teams in India and they kind of feel that they're very low rank and they don't have a say within the company, but they're doing so much of the work. And it's because of their interactions with other team members who are supposedly higher rank that they are of the view that they are a lower rank and they don't have a voice. And what I have found is that what I try to focus on is trying to help people find their own personal power. And I don't think you can really do it, even if you I have some team sessions and I get, everybody to kind of voice and just talk about, non-work stuff and get, the views out there. But it's a tricky question for me. And I really don't know how we get to that point of, organizations, or just, should I say, systems in general, focusing on how do we get people to realize their own personal power and do away with this kind of idea or notion of people having a lower rank than others.
Right. Well, it's two parts to that question. I think one, the question about your personal power, which I think you can speak to in terms of, look, we all have experiences in our lives where we experience higher rank and lower rank, and it changes moment to moment. So at work, I may experience lower rank. I go home and with my children, I'm high rank. Yeah. So we might all have moments of experiencing that, so we're always navigating that. It's not a fixed, it's not a fixed number anywhere. It's constantly changing and it's fluid and it's very contextual, right? So I think you can work on that. In terms of the trying to eliminate the feeling of low rank, where you've got inbuilt structural inequality, that I think is perhaps not the best question. I think the question is, how do we acknowledge the truth in those perceptions and the impact that they have on us, and continue to and move on and do something creative about it? Because I think saying that, trying to disappear it is in a way kind of denies it to people. And I think it's, that is their lived experience. And, we live in a world of structural inequalities. If we pretend otherwise, we're denying people's reality.
Yeah. So I think just to clarify, so I don't want to disappear it, but I'm trying to figure out how do you express it, should I say. So I have had the thing where I've expressed to colleagues that, hey, you can't have the assumption that because you're working with distributed teams and they're based in India, that they're not invested. And the reason why I had to say that is because nobody gives that team the reason for the why. There is just the expectation that you just do.
Right.
And even though I may have had that difficult conversation, I'm not sure that it actually landed with the person. And there's only like little bits that you can kind of chip away at to get some done. And I mean, in the end, I just kind of said culturally, I didn't think that the company would change, so I left.
Right.
But at the same time, I would kind of like try to hopefully, if I find myself in another situation like that, that there can be some effective change or some help that I can provide to the cultural context.
Yes, and this is culture is the hardest thing to change. And as we say, culture eats strategy for breakfast and lunch and dinner. And one of the cultural features we see in where there's big structural inequalities persistent over time is learned helplessness. So even when things start to change, or even when the narrative changes, say, well, I'm listening now, it's, there's a learned helplessness. And that predates people's current jobs. It's built into our socialization. So it's, one of the biggest influences in any organization's culture is the culture outside of the organization, right? It's the context. So, what people come into the door every day as either employees or customers or whatever, or in my case, patients, and they bring the culture inside the organization. And so you can't separate organizational culture entirely from the wider culture in which it exists.
Yeah. To add on to that, this is one thing that I've noticed in my work, especially since the start of lockdown. A lot of us who were introverts once said that, oh, lockdown, working at home, this is great. I've wanted to do this all my life. Right? On the other hand, I was thinking that maybe a virtual environment would level the playing field for a lot of people. But on the other hand, when we start looking outside of that culture into the biggest culture at large, we start seeing things that we didn't think about in that context. Rank, bandwidth, latency, your network. That's a first world problem. Let's not even go on to the point of saying, social distancing when you're living together in slums. Let's take a look at the issues that we have of why do I have developers in India who won't turn on their cameras because they're embarrassed to show people where they live. Right? This is the culture at large. And what can we do to work on helping level the playing field for the culture at large so that people feel more comfortable that this idea of rank, I don't notice rank. I'm comfortable where I am. I have a high bandwidth, things, stuff like that. I only notice it when, connections start breaking down and say, oh, it's not my fault. And these are some of the bigger issues that a lot of us have happily ignored dealing with for the last year. And these are part of the things that are bothering your Indians and that they're constantly reminded of. And I have no solutions for that. It's just I have this problem staring me in the face every day.
Well, I don't know if there's a solution to the inequities of the world, but what we can do is we can say, I recognize this. I recognize this is an issue for you. It may not be my lived experience, but it is yours. And what we can say is, here in the world in the little piece of the world that I can influence, I expect everybody to treat everybody else with dignity and respect. And I will always treat people with dignity and respect, and I will expect the same from them. And I won't tolerate incivility in my work environment. If somebody's committing an act of aggression, I will call it out, because if one person's put down in a group and you don't call it out, it becomes less safe for everybody.
Yeah. So,
right?
sorry, Susie, you raised your hand. Hi.
Yeah, hi. So first of all, thank you for that super interesting conversation. And I had something on learned helplessness, because I read a recent article lately about that, and it made me curious, because I didn't know that actually according to the newest neuropsychology research, it's not learned helplessness what's learned, it's like learned helpfulness. We learn the active part, like not being helpless. And I found it interesting. I don't know how this might be helpful for you. And if you did know that, I didn't.
Thank you. If you could send
the paper
reference,
Yeah.
please do send the reference, and thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Is also a thing that just popped into my mind here is once going back to Suzuki's Zen mind, and being a beginner's mind, in learning to be open once again. And I'd be interested to see how those concepts fit in with each other.
Yes, it does. It does take something of a beginner's mind. So yeah. So I mean, I've been a psychologist for over 30 years, and I'm always very appreciative of learning new stuff. So thank you.
Sure.
Yeah.
Other thoughts, reflections on what we've said?
Yeah. So I'd like to say one thing at the end. I normally put this up on a slide. LinkedIn. If I'm not hooked up with you, I'm happy hooking up with people on LinkedIn. But since I don't know everybody, I don't collect connections. If I don't know you yet, happy to hook up with you, but just please write me a message saying, hey, we chatted at this thing, so I know how to hook you in, because otherwise I will ignore you. Be honest about that. It's yeah.
So you are not a lion, Joseph.
No, actually, I started out doing this at the bottom of the text on LinkedIn. Psychologists know what an attention task is when you're doing cognitive testing, right? Just to watch out if people are taking it. I put something down at the bottom and saying, if I don't know you, write something to me. And most people ignored it. Then I moved it up to the top where you can't oversee it. And some people still ignore it. It just, I like to know, I see there's a lot more people here who don't have their video on. Maybe they have bandwidth problems or something like that. But happy to hook up with you. Just let me know where we've met, so I can put that into my OCD, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually have a question. It's something that we touched actually, but maybe I missed something. I'm not sure that we covered. Talking about ranking, as Christina was mentioning, it is quite often. I used to work also with offshore teams, so this, let me say, unbalanced ranking sometimes happen during the conversation. But as a facilitator, what can be a, let me say, 1 million tip that you can provide to help reducing this gap in the rank? Make sense?
So I find one of the ways that helps me, I mean, aside from, sometimes it's a bit much for people to address rank issues directly, especially if you have a culture of deference that you're dealing with, where people don't openly talk about power and rank. But one of the things for me is just asking people about their families, and talking about your own, just I think because that's like a very human thing. Everybody has or had parents. Many of us have children. Yeah, or so just inquiring about people, about their personal lives, sometimes can build relationship. It levels things a bit. Yeah, I mean, obviously their experiences are different, but the fact that we all love our kids is kind of a common thing.
Mhm.
The fact that we're all concerned about the health of our aging parents, if we have them or whatever, is a common thing.
Mhm.
So I think you find some very human common ground. I mean, that would be one suggestion.
Yeah, we actually a few months ago started an initiative that we call Friday Tea, in which in the afternoon of Friday we spent 1 hour roughly talking about everything but work.
Mhm.
Okay, so about the family, about the cricket, about football, about Elon Musk missions, and for everything except work. Okay. And I noticed that at the beginning there were some changes in the relation,
Mhm.
but now after 4 months is exactly as before. And actually what's happened is that the participation to this Friday Tea is getting lower and lower, starting with the lower engagement and later with people that, okay, but I have something else to do, I cannot join, and also the participation, not only the engagement, but also the participation. So actually, I mean, we have this this bump at the beginning, but after that, everything was as before. That's why I made the question, just to have some what we can do.
I'm curious what happened for people, what their experience was, what they liked about it, and why they pulled back.
It's a complex system that once again went back to the point of stasis, right?
Yeah.
And you push it, but it not back. Corrado, one thing I might mention, I'll chat with you offline about that. I have a colleague of mine who I did my master's together with, who actually specializes in this, in transformative conversations. And I'm actually doing a training with her right now. And it's one of the most awesome and surprising and scary trainings I've been on in a long time, pushing you out of your comfort zone, learning how to talk with people. Because she was even more introverted than I was. And as a psychologist, she started doing research on this, trying to understand more about it and how to get out of that. And now she does courses on this, and she's a great presenter and things like that. And she might be somebody to invite in to do a talk sometime. Has nothing at all to do with IT, stuff like that. Yeah. Philosophy, psychology, and linguistics, but she's an amazing, charming person, TED speaker, and stuff like that.
Okay, let's talk offline.
Yeah.
Okay, any more questions?
Yeah.
Observation, experience that you want to share, maybe.
Maybe I don't know if I'm visible, because at one moment I lost the bandwidth and I turned off the camera, but now I have it on and on the previous gray. So I hope you can see me, but I'm not sure.
You're black now.
Okay, so I hope the voice will be enough. But I actually had I have a funny story, because now I work, maybe not, but my career is quite unusual. Or maybe not in this group, but I'm a biochemist. I have PhD in microbiology, but I work in IT now as a Scrum Master. And why I landed there is because at one point my friends were looking someone to work as a DevOps, and they were like, "Oh, but you're diligent and you are good in data analysis and you speak English. Maybe you will be good in IT." So I tried, and now I'm Scrum Master. But when I was doing PhD and when I left, is because there was this rank abuse, and the hierarchy was, well, it was not a good place. Actually, everything you do, it was the ownership of the professors, and if they wanted something, you had to deliver. And no, it was not really a good place. So there I was quite scared about the hierarchy and ranks. But when I moved to the corporation, somehow and my friend knew the background, so he was able to explain, and that was one of the arguments is, see, there is this hierarchy, but if something is wrong, there are so many levels, and you can always speak up to someone who is like, oh, I don't know, on the level of a manager or higher up. There is, you can contact them, and or there is anonymous like hotline, and so we can deal with this stuff if something is wrong. So you don't have to be worried. So depending on the like this change of environment actually made the hierarchy and the ranking system for me to be something that made me feel safe, that it can help me. I will know that I can be heard if I'm feeling bad or abused again. So this information about like like how environments shape our behaviors and how rank influences that. This your talk, like Ben and Joseph, thank you very much, because it made me like quite realize like what were the forces in my head in environment that made me like function in the way that I did years ago and how I function now.
Thank you for sharing that story, and it's a great example of exactly why we need to create safety. That your leaving that organization was their loss because the abuse of rank drove you away. And so I think it's a great example. People leave organizations. It's hard to attract and hang on to talent if you don't have good power relationships in your organization.
Yeah.
We're losing people as well. Maybe we should, Joseph, what do you think? Should we wrap up in the next minute or two?
Yeah. I just want to point out, Phile, you wrote something about 36 questions for increasing closeness. Actually, that's not. Those are Aaron's 36 questions to make someone fall in love with you. And be careful, it does work. So you might want to be wary about doing that at work. So yes, it's a quite well-known set of questions. But I also have to agree with Veronica about rankism and how brutal academia is. Yes, which is one of the reasons I was happy to get out of it. Yeah.
Yes, there's an old quote by Henry Kissinger, and this is the only thing I'll ever quote Kissinger on. He said, "The reason there's so much infighting in academia is because the stakes are so low."
Exactly.
We come to this stage like to pursue PhD because like, but just choose your like professor, the one like the head that's gonna take care of you very wisely. This was my biggest mistake. Yeah. I had a great person that was handling my master's degree. He was awesome, but his rank was not high enough to have PhDs. So I had to do someone else, and this was nice.
Okay, so I guess thank you, everybody. I really enjoyed this. I hope that you took some nuggets of wisdom along, discovered maybe a little bit more about yourself. My suggestions would be to go, self-reflect on what are the power bases that you use. How are you using your power to help influence people? And also look at those core competencies, your rational, emotional, social, physical, and spiritual competencies, and think about where you can work on yourself to improve. And by improving yourself, you're improving the way that you can help others. Okay. So thanks, Ben, for joining in. It was so nice to hear you talk again. Thanks, Corrado, for inviting us. And thanks to all of you who took the time out of this evening, I guess, to listen. I wish you a nice time.
Yeah, thank you,
everyone.
Thank you.
And
thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. I will put the link that you put in the chat. I will copy in the meeting page, so they are there forever.
Okay, good.
Thank you for sharing.
Okay, right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, thank you.
Hey, Ben.
Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you for sharing, Ben.
Will you send a link to this when it goes on the YouTube channel? Will you send me a link?
Yeah, sure. Of course.
Okay,
Of
thanks.
course.
Okay, bye for now.